Coming up on today's show, the Falcons made 2 roster moves, an addition and a subtraction, so we'll fill you in on that. Plus, they were somewhat linked to a former top 5 pick in the NFL draft, so we'll talk about the possible signing at the wide receiver position. But first, I do want to run through the roster moves that were made. So first, they claimed an offensive lineman off of the waiver wire, Andrew Stueber. We'll get you familiar with him. And to make room for Mr. Stueber, they waived wide receiver JaQuae Jackson. Also, if you want to get more roster updates, I invite you to hit the sub button down below. Get us to 22,100 subscribers. But let's get some background on the newest member of the Atlanta Falcons, a 2022 7th-round draft pick out of Michigan by the New England Patriots, Andrew Stueber. We have yet to see him play in an NFL regular season game. Unfortunately, he missed his entire rookie season due to a torn hamstring. That was 2022, and then he spent 2023 on the practice squad. So 0 regular season appearances, but the Falcons looking to add a little bit more competition at their backup offensive tackle spot. And I'm all for it. Like Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry have shown over their NFL careers, they are consistent, available players. But last year we did see some holes in the boat when it came to their availability. And Vrabel and Storm Norton, I think, filled in admirably at times. But no, the more the merrier when it comes to competition for that swing tackle job that's going to be going underway all spring training or spring practices and training camp long. As for the wide receiver room, doesn't really look any different. I'm sorry, Mr. JaQuae Jackson, but he was always competing for a practice squad spot at best. So the Falcons still have plenty of wide receivers to get through the rest of OTAs, minicamp, and into training camp when it comes to getting enough bodies on the field just to have drills completed. Now, these are definitely some random Falcons players, but I do want to ask you all watching right now, who was your first favorite Falcons player? For people that grew up in kind of my generation, usually came down to which player dominated on my PSP, and I was pretty efficient when it came to moving the football with Michael Turner. Big Booty Turner was definitely a favorite of mine on PSP. So let me know who your favorite first Falcons player was down in the comment section. Now I want to talk about signing Corey Davis potentially. That is the former top 5 draft pick that is currently a free agent. He is a free agent, but it's just a little bit more complex than your usual free agent because he retired in August 2023, right before the start of last season. He then applied for reinstatement in March of 2024. The Jets placed him on the reserved/retired list. You can't just retire to get out of your contract. If you come out of retirement, whatever team you're under contract with before has kind of first dibs on you, so to speak. But he has been approved to be a free agent and go sign elsewhere. And Bleacher Report picked the Atlanta Falcons as a landing spot for Davis. Here's what Alex Ballentine from Bleacher Report had to say. The Atlanta Falcons stand out as a team that could use the 6'3" receiver. Outside of Kyle Pitts and Drake London, they've opted for smaller receivers with Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore entering the fold. I'm not opposed to adding really any wide receiver because I feel like the wide receiver position in 2024 for the Falcons will carry much more weight and importance than it did the previous few years. And that's been reflected with free agent signings like Darnell Mooney and trading for Rondale Moore. But I still feel like there is more to be done when it comes to the wide receiver position for Atlanta. Corey Davis didn't play last season. As we know, he stepped away from football. And the Falcons have been somewhat of a hub for players who retired and then want to come back. And we've seen that play a couple times with Eddie Goldman. What's one more with Corey Davis? 2 years in New York, 2 underwhelming seasons for what the Jets paid for him in free agency, combining for 6 touchdowns over those 2 years. Before that, in Tennessee, he had some strong years. 2020, 984 yards, 5 touchdowns. He had a really good, slow start, but kind of picked things up as he went along in Tennessee. And when you look at Atlanta's wide receiver room one more time, those are 3 good faces on screen. Like Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Rondale Moore. There's a lot to be excited and optimistic about, especially about London and Mooney, and more so those 2 guys than Moore. But after those top 3 players, there are some question marks, right? You've got Kaderil Hodge. He's got all of 5 career grabs the last 2 or 3 years. Ray McCloud's a special teamer Washington's a rookie from Illinois. You can't put too much stock into him for his first year. And when you look at what Mooney and Moore were able to do last season along with Drake London, I feel like Drake London is a bona fide 1,000-yard receiver this year with Kirk Cousins as his quarterback. But we definitely need to see an uptick in production from Mooney and Moore. And ultimately, I just feel like Atlanta needs more wide receiver depth, right? This is going to be an offense that uses their wide receivers more than they have the last 4 or 5 seasons. So more is more when it comes to the wide receiver position. And I'll expand on that and tell you why in just a second. But first, if you want to get some new Falcons gear in your closet, go to chatsports.com/Falcons combo. You're not going to get just one t-shirt. You'll get 2 t-shirts, 25% off as well. Now, don't worry. I put this link in the comments and description of today's video. So check it out if you want to get some more Falcons merchandise in your life. So as I was saying, and we've seen this graphic before, but if you're just kind of tuning in for the first time recently, this is 11 personnel usage. What does that mean in layman's terms? 11 personnel means 1 running back, 1 tight end, and then thus 3 wide receivers. If you've got 12 personnel, that's 1 running back, 2 tight ends. So the Rams, which is where a good chunk of the Falcons' new coaching staff comes over from, was first in the NFL last year in 11 personnel usage, meaning they had 3 wide receivers on the field more than anyone else. The Vikings, which is where Kirk Cousins comes over from, was 13th last year. The year before that, though, when Kirk Cousins played the entire season, they were much higher than 13th. The Falcons last year, well, they were 31st. So this is going to be a bit of a adjustment, to say the least, when it comes to the wide receiver role for the Atlanta Falcons this year compared to last year. They're going to have a lot more 3 wide receiver sets, which means you need to have 3 good wide receivers. And if you are running 3 wide receivers, that means more snaps for all 3 of those guys, bigger likelihood of maybe an injury popping up, or just overall fatigue as the game goes on. So you got to have some good depth. And that's where Corey Davis could be an asset. You've got Casey Washington. He's had a really strong spring so far. Boots on the ground reporting has indicated that he's had a good connection with rookie quarterback Michael Penix. But ultimately, don't fall trap to the rookie hype show, too much. Every single year this happens for all 32 teams where spring practices roll around. There's no pads. It's flag football. And that's usually where skilled players can kind of put on some good highlight tape and whatnot. But once the pads come on and contact comes into play, it's a very different game. So Casey Washington has had a nice spring so far, but no, I'm not going to be the person that puts all my eggs in him being a really solid number 4, number 5 rookie wide receiver for this team. So with all that being said, would you sign Corey Davis? Give me a yes or give me a no down below in the comments section. I just want to get your take on the idea of adding the former top 5 pick out of Western Michigan. If Atlanta does not add Corey Davis or any other wide receiver, I'm not going to say that's a make or break kind of thing for them right now, but there's definitely a lot more stock that goes into guys like Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore. Darnell Mooney especially, right? He got a nice near $40 million contract in free agency. His last 2 years in Chicago were underwhelming. Let's just call it what it is. 3 combined touchdowns and didn't even combine for 1,000 yards over those 2 years after a breakout 2021 season where he went over 1,000 yards and had multiple touchdowns. But you look at Darnell Mooney's first 2 years in Chicago versus his last 2 years in Chicago, and I think a big reason as to why he started to fall off a bit, just from a production standpoint, is the Bears tried to make him a receiver that he isn't, and that's a slot wide receiver. 2/3 of his snaps the last 2 years came in the slot. 1/3 of his snaps the first 2 years came in the slot. Which 2-year stretch was better? The one on the left or the one on the right? So I sure hope the Falcons learn from the Bears' mistakes, and that is don't use Darnell Mooney as a slot wide receiver. Use him as an outside wide receiver, which is why I think if Atlanta was to add another wide receiver, it should be a slot guy. I know Bleacher Report said they've got London and Pitts, but after that, they've got some smaller dudes, and they're not wrong, but Darnell Mooney should not be a slot wide receiver. So if they're looking to add a wide receiver, I'd like to see them add a slot wide receiver, because the only one really at that spot right now is Rondale Moore. And sure, Kyle Pitts could be a slot wide receiver. He basically is actually, but still, let's get some more depth because you are one injury away from there being a problem. And this is a wide receiver unit that's going to be leaned on heavily. Last year, if your number 2 or 3 wide receiver went down, say Mac Hollins, for example, the offense wouldn't be on fire. Like, it wouldn't be a disaster or a train wreck because the offense last year didn't run through receivers 2 and 3. This year, receivers 2 and 3 are going to have a much bigger role than previous years under Arthur Smith. So that's why I like to see Atlanta add some more depth at that spot. That will do it for us on today's show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed our video, leave us a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Really appreciate it. And if you're still watching right now, I'm a sucker for the end of the video crew. So scroll on down and give me an ATL.